Saturday, May 16th, the votes came in and it was an overwhelming no. No, we're not doing this. We are not supporting these amendments that are being pushed onto us. And we pushed back because I think overall, the folks of Louisiana are sick of it. We're sick of the shit. We are sick of being told and sold one narrative when in reality, when you start digging down deeper, you start to see what is really happening under the surface. And people are becoming more educated. And I think truly the results of this past election show that totally, that the previous ways in which the political machine was able to control how the folks of Louisiana would vote or what they would see is really, not as powerful as it used to be. And that's honestly one of the things that scares them the most. So we'll also be getting into the political gaslighting we can all expect coming in the next few months. And we're also going to be talking about what happened in the Republican Senate primary and how Bill Cassidy is not going to be on the ballot for the next Senate election. One of the things that the political machine here in Louisiana has heavily relied on is being able to control a narrative. They spend millions and millions of dollars in making sure that the narrative that gets pushed out is one that aligns with something that will benefit them and not necessarily benefit the people of Louisiana. Well, because educators have become, not educators, my goodness, voters have become more educated, and there are educators who are voters, because folks like me and you have become more educated, become more comfortable with asking the harder questions and learning how to access public records like the campaign finance reports, and really being able to read and interpret these amendments, or at least having access to folks that can break those things down to us. That means that the power that the political machine has had is starting to kind of loosen. And that means that the people, because the narrative is no longer solely controlled by the political machine, the people are gaining more power. And that's something I want you guys to really hold on to, is that this is not just a overwhelming vote no on these amendments. This is actually something so much bigger than that. And so when the Louisiana voters are voting no on these amendments, in spite of the millions of dollars that was spent to promote these amendments, they did not get back on their investment what they had hoped they would. Now, one thing to keep in mind though, and this is part of this political machine, and this is why this is important to talk about, is that just because they spent millions of dollars, know that yes, they lost, but a lot of people benefited from them spending millions of dollars. So when I have gone through campaign finance reports for a lot of the politicians in my community in St. Tammany Parish, but also on the state level, what you will see is how much money gets spent on these political narrative control operations. But even if it doesn't pass, like it did this time, even if that didn't work, there are people who absolutely financially benefited from the whole operation. And I mean, not just a little. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars going to consultants, to political media companies, to Facebook marketing and Meta, all of that coming from, these large PACs who are funneling money through either corporations, super wealthy individuals, Washington, D.C. itself, all focusing on driving a machine. And the whole time, people are benefiting from segments of all of this, which is why this machine is such a hard thing to get rid of, and why they work overtime to discredit voices like my own and voices like yourself to make you not trust what you see with your own eyes. So while the voters of Louisiana overwhelmingly rejected all 5 of the Landry-backed amendments that he wanted to make and his whole team wanted to make to the Louisiana Constitution, there's a few that I want to specifically touch upon because I think that they are going to be ripe for that political gaslighting that we can all expect to happen after this whole thing really has a moment to take a breath, and the realization that is coming from those folks who are really trying to push these amendments through. So the first one I want to talk about is St. George. So St. George is a sort of wealthy enclave that is a part of East Baton Rouge Parish. Now, they are part of East Baton Rouge Parish school system as well. However, they wanted to pull out of East Baton Rouge school system and create their own independent school district. Now, the voters of Louisiana overwhelmingly voted no on this amendment. But I think it's important for us to understand why this was a terrible idea and how the voters who voted no have actually managed to save St. George from making one of the most critical economic mistakes that they could possibly make. So when St. George, think of it like this, okay? You go out to a restaurant and everybody sits at the same table. We're all a group together. You know, we're all having a good time, eating, you know, a triple dipper from Chili's. I don't know. But, you know, everybody's eating and drinking. And then suddenly one section of the table, you know, gets up and is like, yeah, so we're just going to take this food on this side of the table. We're going to go have a party someplace else. And you guys are going to be left with paying the rest of the bill. Even though they have been benefiting from the collective experience of all of us being able to share the end bill, they just decide, you know what, we're just going to do our own thing. Thanks so much. Bye. See you later. Now, the reality of that is that those who are still left at the table are expected to foot the bill, apparently. And that's exactly what St. George was trying to do, is they have benefited, whether they like to admit it or not, from being connected to the East Baton Rouge Parish school system. Now, they were trying to say that this was parental choice and, you know, the school system has failed us. And to that, I would say, welcome to other people's experiences. Because yes, people get very frustrated by these systems. However, they don't have the option to just nope the fuck out, unlike St. George was trying to do, and leave those people to be paying the rest of the essentially legacy debt, which is things like the medical and the retirement for the teachers in East Baton Rouge Parish. They were going to basically take 5,800 students out of the East Baton Rouge Parish. They wanted to keep some of the school systems or the school buildings and those sorts of things, and then just have like their own little like private little school club, basically. Meanwhile, the folks that are in East Baton Rouge Parish that aren't part of St. George, they equally contributed to paying for the schools that St. George wanted to just like co-opt and take with them. And when you think about it, like aside from that being just a very privileged sort of perspective, this is what the problem is when you take the easy way out, because St. George was trying to take the easy way out. They didn't want to fight for any sort of educational reform that would benefit not just their kids, but benefit kids across the board. Because I'm not exactly sure why, whether it be racism or they feel threatened or they feel like my dollar should only go towards my kids' stuff. Well, if that's the case, then put your kids in fucking private school. I mean, I don't know what else to say to y'all. But also, from an economic standpoint, and this is evidence-based, by the way, like Harvard has done studies about how investing in a healthy education system across the board actually benefits the GDP for a region. So, and like to the tune of like between 20 and 35%. So by St. George trying to be this little exclusive enclave, what they were actually doing was creating a trap for themselves economically. And I mean, it's just economically irresponsible when you think about it, because, okay, that's great that you all have those businesses that are in that community And, you have all of this wonderful education system that only if you live in that community, you'd be able to access. But who do you think your workforce is going to be? Honestly, where do you think they will come from to run your companies and your businesses and, work at the hospital systems there? That's going to come from outside because it has to. And so what you actually do is you shrink your economic opportunity. And so people aren't going to want to invest in building in St. George, whether it be a corporation or other local businesses that help drive the economic health of a community. They're not going to want to invest there because it's not going to be fruitful for them, because you're only benefiting a certain few when really they need a workforce that comes from a much larger portion of people. And so by making yourself this exclusive little enclave of an independent school, it actually causes you to decrease opportunity in your community. So to St. George, you're welcome to the folks that voted no, because what they're actually doing is saying, you know what, if you can't take the easy way out here. If you want change to happen, you have to realize that you have to fight for it across the board, and that if somebody who is from the other side of town, who might not be economically as advantaged as somebody who's living in St. George, that overall, the long-term investment in that person's education will ultimately become a tremendous value to the people that are living in St. George. Now, most of these people they only see what is in front of them, because either they're told to, or they look at people who don't have what they have as the enemy. But the reality is, a community that invests in the foundational elements of building a healthy education system, and you guys have the resources to do it, actually overall benefits the people who do that. They get a significant return on their own investment, but also they help raise the caliber of the workforce, and therefore folks from other places like, other corporations and stuff like that want to set up shop will be able to do that because they know that they will have a high quality workforce available to them. All right, folks, now let's talk about Amendment 3, because this amendment is the one that I think is going to receive the most sort of like gaslighting behind it. And one, you guys voted no on it, which props. And then two, the reason they're going to gaslight you guys so much is because of the fact that this was a move on the political machine's part to paint this as a permanent raise for teacher pay. Now, because you guys are smarties over here, you guys quickly read the fine print on this and said, wait a minute, what this really is about is you all draining 3 constitutionally protected billion-dollar funds, which, by the way, generate something like $68 million just in interest alone. So they literally sit in an account and they generate interest, because that's called compounding interest. And if you were to ask any of these wealthy business folks if that would be a smart idea, if they would ever do that for themselves, overwhelmingly the response would be abso-fucking-lutely not. Because why would you take money out, pay down debt, and then essentially just pass off the obligation to maintain a teacher raise onto the parish, while that money that was in there that was generating, interest and would continue to generate interest is just poof gone. And then the expectation would be on the parish and the taxpayers of each individual parish to make up the gap. It doesn't make sense at all from an economic standpoint in any sort of way. But the problem is they frame it as you not voting for teacher raises, when in reality, if they actually wanted to give teachers raises, they would do it without any fucking strings attached, just like they vote themselves raises. And And that's the problem that this political machine is running into, is that people are a lot more educated when they're voting now than what we have been. And the power of that political machine to control that narrative is basically being challenged by the people of Louisiana and their ability to ask the why questions. Now, the political machine in Louisiana has a skill set, I will say, for making folks think that when they talk about business, that they are talking about the mom and pop shops, the small, boutiques, or the car dealership in town, or whatever it is. And so what they were trying to do was to get us to vote so that we would remove the levy tax for inventory. And for a lot of parishes, especially parishes that have, large corporations in there, or large warehouses or various things like that, that could be a critical source of income when they levy that tax on inventory. But the way they're going to present it and the way they present it to us is that that's us voting against the mom and pop shop. When in reality, what it is and what you guys are smart enough to do and what you did was vote against these major companies getting more and more tax breaks here in Louisiana. Because what we have learned is that businesses love doing business in Louisiana because none of the money that they generate here in Louisiana really ever actually goes to the people of Louisiana. They may pay us a paycheck, but then we end up getting hit with this tremendous tax gap, where it's totally fine for these large companies to use, electricity and to use our roads and to have, folks that use our school systems and all of that kind of stuff. But then when it comes time for their bill to be paid, the politicians in Louisiana are like, oh, well, guys, we can't make them pay, because if they pay, then they won't want to come back. But the reality is that that's not even the case. That's not the case. That what they have done is they created a hostage situation where we, the people of Louisiana, absorb the cost of doing business, of these large corporations doing business, and they give us like the crumbs of a paycheck, and that's it. But in reality, they love doing business down here because they get away with everything. They get away with they love it when we absorb the cost of them doing business here. And that's exactly what Amendment 4 was really about. And I'm so proud of you, Louisiana, for being able to see through the bullshit. So that vote, the results of the vote on Saturday against those amendments really just showed to the political machine how powerful educated voters can actually be, how powerful them having access to alternative voices or narratives outside of the ones that they essentially pay the local media to produce for them. They're learning and they're feeling very threatened by voices like my own and other folks, and even you being able to critically think on your own. They're threatened by that. Recently, I've had a couple people in my comment sections accuse me of either claiming allegations against people or saying, what's the point in you bringing up the public records and talking about how this person spent this much on their campaign and me presenting questions. And the reality is one, I am not here to accuse anybody of anything. Because like I always say over and over again is, I don't know what the hell constitutes a crime anymore. Because like I said, the things that I think would absolutely be problematic behavior or crimes oftentimes are not, nor am I an expert in that, nor do I pretend to be. I am also not an investigative reporter, nor have I ever said I was. And what I am is a social worker. I'm somebody who's very proud of the fact that I'm a social worker, but as a social worker, I think in systems. I see how the system moves and operates and how when certain elements are broken, what the consequences of that are. And so what my point here in sharing the stuff that I find in public records is not to play gotcha journalism, because honestly, I'm not even interested in that. I don't like the T element of it. My thing is saying that we should be totally fine to ask the question why. Just because something is not a crime does not mean that it's right. Doesn't mean that we're not allowed to ask questions. I just want to make you all aware that my job here is not to be some investigative reporter or anything like that. I've never claimed to be, and I know that I'm not. That is a title that people have gone to school for, have earned, and deserve to hold. My thing is really saying, okay, this is what the public records show. Why are we not talking about this? Why is this person connected to that person? Why are they donating to each other's campaigns? Why is an accounting firm that is donating to one of the political entities that they also do the legislative audits for? Like, it is perfectly fine, and it should be on us to ask those questions. But that's the thing, is that this machine has operated for so long here because people have been either silenced because of threats, or have been told that they're not credible or anything like that. And news flash to all of those people, I don't give a shit, to be quite honest. I know who I am. I know that what I am saying, and I know that the people who get it. And the big thing here is that I want folks to know is that I am not pretending to be something I'm not. I am here to show that there's another side of this story, and why the fuck are we not being taught? Why is that not being talked about? And that's really what this is about, and that's what IWIN News is about, because a lot of us already know what the other side of the story is. There's just nobody else really talking about it. And IWIN News is here to give that permission, to say it's okay for us to question how much we can trust a legislative audit if the people that are running and doing the audit are also donating money to the same entity that they're auditing. Like, I don't know, like, are we in crazy land? No, we're just in Louisiana. But so many of us are becoming way more educated and know that it is okay for us to start asking the questions, and that's what bothers them. So if you are finding yourself being gaslit, whether it be in comments or, just you having your own personal opinion about stuff, you're allowed to. You're allowed to have your own personal beliefs about what you are seeing and your own interpretations. The last thing the political machine and the good old boys, the last thing they want you to be able to do is to be able to navigate public records, to ask, like, well, why did you do that? Well, why are you doing this? They don't like that question, because that's called accountability. And when you have an educated voter bloc, then they have to work overtime to make sure that they spin the narrative in a way that you will believe them. But when you're educated, you can push back. When you can go and you look at the campaign finance reports, you can say, hey, wait up, time out. Why is Jay Morris and his law firm, why are they donating to the sheriff in New Orleans? Why is this happening? And that's the whole point. That's the thing that is the biggest threat to their power. So keep using your voice. I'm going to keep using mine, and we'll see where it takes us. One of the frustrating points of the narrative pushback that I'm receiving is not that somebody doesn't like me. I could honestly give two shits less. I am not here to be liked. I've learned that a long time ago. And I couldn't do the job that I do if I needed people to validate me, to like me, to say that, all of that kind of stuff. I could not create actual change in the world that I work in if I was reliant on being liked all the time. But what is really frustrating and annoying is the way in which they are trying to tell you all that you questioning what you find in public records is not okay. Now, newsflash to all of them, the public records are for the public, okay? You being able to find the information you do, whether it be, land records, whether it be campaign contributions, whether it be legislative audits, all of these other sources of information, they are so used to us not being involved in that the second that we start claiming that as data that we can use, they immediately try to discredit us or try to say, you're not reading it right, you're not looking at it right, you're not an investigative journalist. The fuck I'm not, I know. I'm a social worker. I work in toxic systems. I work in, and I understand what the outcomes of these broken systems end up creating. And that's why they don't want you to know how to use these things. So, like I said, I'm all here for civic education. I will always let you know where I get my information from, and I am always going to encourage you to look the information up yourself and draw your own conclusions, because that's what this is all about, is you being able to take that and make it a skill set so that you can then hold our public officials accountable. Regardless of which side of the political spectrum you're on, at least you will be able to know how to look up information and make your own decisions. And that is the thing that is the biggest threat to them, and I think that says a lot about them. So last night, Bill Cassidy was also completely knocked out of the future Senate election here for the U.S. Senate for Louisiana. Cassidy is one of two senators, and now that he's been primaried, basically people had three choices who were Republicans. They could vote Letlow, which every time I hear that commercial, liberal Julia Letlow, I just crack up at that, because really, Letlow, John Fleming, or Cassidy, and people overwhelmingly voted for either Fleming or Letlow, eliminating Cassidy from being able to run again on the ballot. Now, here's the thing. So, this is my personal take on it, my own personal theory on it, and I would love to hear y'all's thoughts about it. But I think after looking at the campaign finance reports and seeing the money and how it flows here into the elections and the campaigns for these politicians, you start to realize that Letlow and Fleming are both sides of the same coin, different sides of the same coin, because the same money that was funneled to Letlow's campaign was also funneling John Fleming's campaign. And my theory is that they introduced Fleming in there because they wanted a guarantee that they were going to get rid of Cassidy. Because once somebody starts to show any sort of what they perceive as disloyalty, and listen, I'm not a fan of Bill Cassidy by any means. I think he's a fucking idiot, honestly, in my opinion. And him being a physician, God help us with some of the bullshit he has said. But what they were doing was they needed to take away Cassidy as an option. So they offered up Fleming and Letlow. But the thing is, Letlow and Fleming are getting money from the same dark avenues that are behind a lot of what is happening here in Louisiana. And so they gave us the illusion, well, not us, I'm not a Republican, but they gave the Republican Party in Louisiana the illusion of choice, when in reality, they had put their eggs in both Letlow and Fleming's basket and figured that would pull away from Cassidy. And it did. It worked. But that doesn't mean that Fleming or Letlow are what's best for Louisiana, or that that's really what people wanted. It's that that's who was being funded, but they were being funded by the same people. And so now what's going to be interesting is the, election leading up, or the time now leading up to the Senate election. But I think it's important to realize that Fleming and Letlow are either one of them, they're both part of the same sort of political infrastructure, just the same one that got Cassidy elected, the same one that gets Mike Johnson elected, but the same fucking one that got fucking Jeff Landry elected. All of that, when you start digging into these campaign finance reports, you see all of these connections. I mean, hell, you even have Jay Morris's PAC donating to a Democratic Black caucus. You have Jeff Landry's PAC donating to a Democratic Black caucus. But you don't hear about that. But it is because there's some political incentive that they get, some power-based incentive by donating to those caucuses. And you never hear the caucuses that they donate to ever speak up about it, because they also benefit. The Democratic caucus, the Democratic Black caucus that they donated to, also benefits from it, because it was run and started by Matthew Willard and Cleo Fields. Matthew Willard is now the councilman at large here in New Orleans, and Cleo Fields is a sitting House of Representative in D.C. for Louisiana. Now do you guys get it? It's all a game for them. They laugh in our face. They, will fund this person and then run an ad again. Like, it's all just a fucking joke. It is all just about moving money through the system and making sure people maintain power and access and control. And that's it. And so the more educated we become, the more we start having conversations, the more we stop participating in the BS that is, the local media here. And I don't blame the journalists at all. This is not towards them, no shade towards them or anything, because I get that they're probably equally frustrated because they can't cover the real stories that are out there, because the politicians are one of the primary sources of ad revenue. We're talking millions of dollars of ad revenue that gets funneled to the news organizations here in the greater New Orleans area is what I can speak to. And we're talking millions of dollars. Now, that's not the journalist's fault, but I can imagine that creates a real tension point when we want to cover the stories like, hey, what is the connection between Matthew Willard, Cleo Fields, and Jay Morris and the Port of New Orleans and what's happening over there? They probably aren't allowed to even go into those types of stories, because you come to find out that the president of such and such media group who runs this local news station is actually affiliated largely with a lot of the good old boys. So that's why even when we're watching the local news and we see so-and-so on there as an expert, listen to how they frame things. Listen to how, for instance, what's happening with DCFS, okay? Listen to how WDSU is framing what's happening. Well, do yourself a favor and look at who the president of WDSU is and how they're connected to the McMath family. And you can do all of this by accessing the public records. And that's the shit that scares them, is because they need us to believe every single word that they say so that they can push through the narrative that ultimately ends up honestly hurting the people of Louisiana and benefiting the good old boys more and more and more. But here at IWIN News, we're sick of the shit. No more bullshit here. We're going to cover what we see, and we're going to do it from a perspective of being a member of the public, because that's what we are. However, we're not going to play in the same sandbox as those people that are writing the narrative. So are we going to piss them off? Absolutely we are. But I'm here for it. All right, folks. Well, y'all have a great, happy rest of your Sunday. I don't have AC, so I'm about to strip down and go jump in the pool. So y'all have a good one.